It was still raining when Ethan saw it. A small brass key, glinting beneath the dull light of the porch lamp, resting perfectly in the center of his welcome mat. There was no note. No sign of who had left it. Just that faint metallic shimmer, half buried under a drop of water rolling slowly across its surface. He bent down, hesitating before touching it. The metal was cold, unnaturally cold, as if it had been pulled from a freezer. A thin engraving ran along the spine. His own initials. Ethan frowned, glancing toward the empty street. Nothing but the sound of the storm and the low hum of streetlights. No footprints. No car. Just rain swallowing every trace of whoever had been here. He turned the key in his hand, trying to place it. He couldn't remember owning any old keys. Everything in his life was digital now, locks, alarms, even his front door. But something about the shape, the weight of it, it felt familiar, like a fragment from a dream he couldn't recall. That night he set the key on his desk, told himself he'd forget about it by morning. But as the house went dark, his mind refused to let go. Sleep came in fragments. And when it did, the dream began. A hallway, long, endless, lined with peeling wallpaper. The floor groaned with each step. At the end stood a door. Old, heavy, wood darkened with age. Its handle was rusted, the keyhole wide and waiting. He reached for the brass key in his hand, the same one from his porch, but the closer he got, the quieter everything became. Until even his breathing disappeared. Then came the whisper. So distant. You locked it, remember? Ethan jolted awake, heart racing. The storm had stopped, leaving only silence and the faint ticking of the clock. For a long moment he stayed still, letting his pulse slow. The dream was already fading, like smoke vanishing in air. He reached for the glass of water beside his bed, and froze. His socks were wet. Mud streaked across the wooden floor near his feet. He turned toward the window. It was closed. The door, locked from inside. Yet there it was, a trail of damp footprints leading from the front door, straight to his desk. The desk lamp was on. The small brass key was gone. Ethan stared at the empty space where it had been, every breath shallow and uneven. He searched the floor, checked under the chair, under the rug. Nothing. Then he noticed something new. On the window pane, faint but visible under the glow of the moonlight, a single fingerprint smeared across the glass. It was his own. He was sure of it. He tried to laugh, to rationalize it. Maybe he'd moved it himself in his sleep. Maybe he'd gone outside and just didn't remember. But when he looked down again, something glinted beneath his bed, just for a second, like metal catching the moonlight. He knelt slowly, breath held. There, half buried in dust, lay the brass key. Still wet with rain. Ethan hadn't slept. The image of the key lying wet beneath his bed refused to leave his mind. It was still there when the sun rose, resting exactly where he'd found it, glinting in the morning light as if waiting for him to pick it up again. He stared at it for a long time before finally giving in. The key felt heavier than it had the night before. The engraving caught the light, sharper now, as if freshly carved. On impulse, Ethan slipped it into his pocket and stepped outside. The storm had cleared, but the air still smelled of wet earth and something else, metallic, faintly sweet. As he walked down the narrow path behind his home, he noticed something strange, muddy prints. Small, faint, and leading away from his porch into the trees. They weren't his. His shoes had clean soles, but these prints were deeper, older, like they'd been there before the rain but had somehow resisted washing away. He followed them. The woods behind his property weren't deep, but today they seemed endless. The air grew colder the farther he went. Trees leaned close together, their branches forming dark corridors of shadow. Every few steps, the world seemed to hold its breath. No birds, no wind, only the quiet rhythm of his own heartbeat. Then, through the mist ahead, he saw it. A house. Old, silent, and completely hidden from the road. Its roof sagged under the weight of moss, the windows sealed by grime. But something about it struck him instantly. He knew this place. He shouldn't, but he did. He stepped closer, his boots crunching over the wet leaves. The door was locked, paint peeling around the handle. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. The key felt almost warm now, as if it wanted to be used. It slid into the lock effortlessly. And turned. The door creaked open with a groan that echoed through the hall. Dust drifted in the air like fog. The smell hit him first, old wood, decay, and something faintly floral beneath it, like forgotten perfume. Inside, the house was still. Furniture draped in sheets. Cobwebs clinging to corners. A staircase on the right that disappeared into darkness above. Ethan ran his hand across the wall, revealing faded wallpaper, green vines winding through cracks and age. He moved slowly down the hallway, drawn by something he couldn't name. On a small table near the living room sat a collection of photographs. Black and white, curled at the edges. He lifted one. It was a picture of him. Younger, maybe 10 years old. Standing in front of this very house. But that couldn't be right. He'd never been here before. He shuffled through more photos, all of him at different ages, playing in a garden, sitting on the porch steps, even one of him sleeping in a room he didn't recognize. But there was always someone else in each image. A woman. Her face blurred. The air shifted behind him, a faint sound, like a floorboard sighing under weight. Ethan froze, eyes locked on the hallway mirror. In the reflection, a dim light flickered upstairs. He turned toward the staircase. The bulb above the landing glowed faintly, swinging as if someone had just passed by. "Hello." His voice cracked the silence. No answer. He took one step toward the stairs, then another. Each creak felt like a heartbeat. Halfway up, the light went out. And from the dark above, a whisper. "You shouldn't have come back." Ethan's breath caught. When he turned toward the door, the key in his pocket burned hot against his leg. Ethan didn't run. He stood frozen on the staircase, staring into the darkness above, his breath misting in the cold air. The whisper still echoed in his mind, soft, trembling, familiar. He couldn't tell if it had come from upstairs or from inside his own head. After a long moment, he stepped back down. The air felt heavier now, as if the house was holding its breath. The photographs on the table seemed to shift under the weak light. The one on top, the picture of him as a child, now showed something he hadn't noticed before. The woman beside him. Her face wasn't blurred anymore. It was clear, defined, but wrong. Her eyes looked directly into the camera, but they seemed alive. Not printed. As if she was staring through the paper itself. Ethan stumbled back, nearly knocking over a lamp. He tried to convince himself he was imagining it. A trick of light, a damaged photo. But when he lifted it again, something cold brushed his wrist, like a static charge snapping against his skin. He dropped the picture. It landed face down. And on the back, written in faded ink, was a name. Eleanor Hart. The same initials engraved on the brass key. Ethan's pulse quickened. The key, his key, had those letters carved into it. But who was she? And why did she have photographs of him from a time he didn't remember? He picked up another photo. This one showed a small garden, overgrown with ivy. The same garden that lay just outside the house's cracked window. In the far corner of the photo, that same woman stood again, half-turned, as though she'd been caught by surprise. Behind her, a faint silhouette of a boy. The boy's face was his. Ethan's throat tightened. His mind flickered with fragments of memory. The sound of a woman's laugh, the scent of lilac perfume, the warmth of hands guiding his own. But the harder he tried to focus, the more the images slipped away, like trying to grasp smoke. He stumbled to the front door, desperate for air. Outside, the mist clung to the ground. The neighbor across the field, an older man in a wool coat, was closing his gate. Ethan called out to him. "Hey, do you know who lived here?" The man turned slowly, squinting. "That place." He paused. "Used to belong to the Harts. They disappeared about 20 years ago." Ethan's mouth went dry. Disappeared? Whole family. House has been empty since. The man hesitated, studying Ethan's face. "You shouldn't be in there, son. Some things are meant to stay locked away." Before Ethan could reply, the man was already walking off, his boots crunching through the frost. Ethan turned back toward the house. Through the window, the photographs on the table were visible again, except now, every single one of them faced the wall. He stepped closer to the glass, his reflection merging with the image inside. And for just a second he saw her. The woman, Eleanor, standing behind him in the reflection. Her lips moved soundlessly. Then the light in the window flickered and went out. Ethan spun around. Nothing but the wind. Still, her voice lingered in his head, soft, mournful, pleading. Find the door, before it finds you. Ethan didn't remember falling asleep. One moment he was sitting on his couch, staring at the brass key turning slowly between his fingers, and the next, he was standing in the hallway again. The same one from his dreams. Long, narrow. Walls peeling with age. The same pattern of faded vines curling up through cracks in the wallpaper. Only this time he felt the floor creak beneath his bare feet. The air smelled of dust and something faintly burnt, like wood that had once been on fire. At the end of the hallway stood the door. The one that haunted him. Dark oak, streaked with black stains, and carved with a symbol that matched the engraving on his key. He took a slow step forward, his pulse echoing in the stillness. Each step seemed to stretch the corridor longer, the door pulling away as if resisting him. A whisper rippled through the silence. His name, spoken softly by a voice he almost recognized. Ethan. He froze. The voice sounded like Eleanor's, but younger, trembling, desperate. Then he heard something else. The sound of fingernails dragging across wood. Scratching. Faint at first, then sharper, faster. Coming from behind the door. Ethan reached for the key around his neck. He didn't remember putting it there, but now it hung on a thin chain, pressing cold against his skin. He tried the handle. It didn't move. The scratching stopped. Silence swallowed the space. Then a whisper slipped through the crack in the door. You shouldn't have locked it. Ethan jerked back, heart hammering. He stumbled into the wall, gasping, and woke up. The sound of rain filled the room. His living room. The key still in his hand. But the air felt different, charged. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and noticed something on his palm. A red mark. Thin and circular, like the imprint of a keyhole. He stared at it in disbelief, then glanced toward the floor. Faint lines ran across the wooden boards beneath his feet. Scratches. Fresh ones. He followed them toward the corner of the room where one plank sat slightly higher than the rest. Kneeling down, he ran his fingers along the edge and pried it up. Beneath the floor was a small hollow space filled with dust and cobwebs, and something metallic. He reached in. The brass key. But it wasn't the same. The metal was darker now, stained with something that looked like dried rust or blood. The initials H were still there, but beside them, a new line of engraving shimmered under the dim light. Do not open. Ethan's breath caught. He stood up, staring at the plank he'd lifted. Beneath it, faint symbols were carved into the wood, circular patterns, repeating. A lock without a door. As he touched the markings, a low hum filled the air. The lights flickered. Somewhere deep within the house, something groaned, wood shifting, air tightening. The sound was coming from below him. From beneath the floor. He backed away, but before he could move further, the whisper returned. Closer this time, rising through the boards. You left it open. The lamp beside him flickered violently, then went out. Ethan stood frozen in the dark, heart pounding, gripping the key so tightly it cut into his palm. For a long time, Ethan just stood there, frozen in the dark, listening to the sound that had risen from beneath the floor. It wasn't words this time, more like breathing. Slow, uneven, human. When the lights finally flickered back to life, the floorboards looked undisturbed again. The scratches were gone. The plank he'd lifted was sealed shut as if it had never been touched. But Ethan knew what he'd heard, and what he'd seen. He grabbed a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer and pried the plank open again. The same hollow cavity waited below, but this time, something new lay inside. A small, dust-covered book bound in cracked leather. A journal. Ethan brushed away the dirt. The initials on the cover matched the key, H. His own. Heart-pounding, he opened the first page. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. It was his. The words inside chilled him. The key doesn't belong to me. The door must stay sealed. If I forget again, remind me, the woman in the photograph is not real. Ethan stared at the sentence until it blurred. He flipped to the next page, blank. Then another. And another. Only the first page had writing. Yet as he held the journal under the lamp, faint indentations appeared on the following pages, the ghost of words once written and erased. He tilted the page under the light. Slowly, the impression of a date became visible. October 24th. The same day. Then a single line beneath it. It opened again. A chill crawled up Ethan's spine. He ran his thumb along the spine of the journal and felt something hard inside. He tore the lining slightly, and a folded piece of old photograph paper slipped out. It showed the same woman from the picture he'd found earlier, but now, her expression was different. Her eyes were wide, terrified, as if she'd seen something just outside the frame. And behind her shoulder, faint but visible, was Ethan himself, standing in the background, looking older. He dropped the photo. His breath came fast. The air seemed to hum again, low and electric. The light flickered once more, and he could swear the shadows in the room shifted. That's when he heard it, a faint knock beneath the floorboards. 3 times. Then silence. Ethan pressed his ear to the wood. Nothing. Just the echo of his own heartbeat. He grabbed the key and held it tightly, glancing toward the door that led to the basement. He hadn't opened it since the night of the blackout. Part of him screamed to leave. To burn the journal, the photograph, everything. But another part of him knew that whatever was happening had started long before tonight. The writing in the journal proved it. He turned to the last page, blank. As he stared, new letters began to carve themselves into the paper, pressing up from underneath as if an invisible hand were writing them. It's in the basement. Ethan stumbled back, the journal falling from his hands. The words pulsed faintly, glowing for a moment before fading into the paper. He looked toward the basement door. The key in his hand felt warm now. Alive. And from behind the door came a sound he hadn't heard in years, a soft, trembling voice whispering his name. Ethan, help me. He took one step toward the door, every instinct screaming to stop, but he didn't. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with the journal open in front of him, staring at the final words, "It's in the basement." The ink had faded, but the message pulsed in his mind like a heartbeat he couldn't quiet. By morning, the air in the house felt heavier, almost charged. Every time he passed the basement door, he swore he heard faint movement on the other side. Not footsteps exactly, but the slow drag of something against concrete. He tried to distract himself, pacing from room to room. That's when he noticed something strange in the hallway, a mirror he didn't remember owning. Oval-shaped, framed in tarnished silver, leaning slightly against the wall. Dusty, yet undisturbed. He stepped closer. His reflection wavered faintly, as if the glass were breathing. He could see the faint outline of his tired face, and then, just for a second, a flicker of someone standing behind him. He spun around. Nothing. When he turned back, the reflection was normal again. Only his own pale face, haunted eyes, and the dim light behind him. Ethan knelt, touching the base of the mirror. It was colder than ice. A small engraving ran along the frame, carved faintly into the metal. The same initials. "Fin," he whispered, "what are you trying to tell me?" The surface of the glass trembled, almost imperceptibly. Then, just for an instant, the reflection changed. The hallway behind him looked darker. The wallpaper peeled. And standing at the far end of the hall was the woman from the photograph. Her head was tilted, her hair hanging in loose, damp strands. Her eyes met his through the glass. Not hateful. Not kind. Just knowing. Ethan stumbled backward. The reflection snapped back to normal. He rushed to the window. It was daylight outside. Everything looked ordinary. But the sense of being watched didn't leave. He opened the journal again, flipping to the blank pages, desperate for answers. Nothing. But when he turned toward the mirror again, faint handwriting appeared across the glass, scrawled backward, like it had been written from the other side. "You've been here before." His pulse spiked. "What does that mean?" he whispered. The reflection seemed to ripple again, and this time, it wasn't showing him the present. The mirror's surface clouded, and he saw flashes, a younger version of himself, standing right here in the same hallway, hammer in hand, nailing the floorboards shut. Behind him, That same woman cried softly, begging him not to leave her down there. Ethan's stomach dropped. "No," he muttered. "That's not possible." The younger version of him looked up suddenly, as if hearing the words. And then he smiled. A hollow, lifeless smile that didn't belong to him. The mirror cracked down the center, shattering the image. Ethan stumbled back, covering his face as shards of glass clattered to the floor. When he looked again, the mirror was gone, vanished, as though it had never existed. Only the faint outline of dust remained where it had stood. In its place lay a single piece of glass, unbroken, catching the morning light. Etched across it, barely visible, were words. "The lock isn't on the door." Ethan's breath trembled. He glanced toward the basement. The key in his pocket felt heavier now, as if something down there was waiting, not to be found, but to be remembered. He reached into his coat, fingers trembling, and pulled the key out once more. It was warm, pulsing softly. And as he took one step toward the basement door, a faint reflection moved in the shard on the floor, not his, but hers. The key felt alive in Ethan's hand, faintly pulsing, like a heartbeat trapped inside metal. He stood at the top of the basement stairs, the air below thick with the smell of damp wood and rust. Every instinct screamed for him to turn back, but the message from the mirror, "The lock isn't on the door," echoed in his head, dragging him downward. He descended slowly, flashlight trembling in his grip. Each step groaned like it was warning him away. The beam of light swept across the concrete floor, catching old tools, shattered jars, and broken picture frames. Nothing out of the ordinary, until he reached the far wall. There, beneath a tangle of old pipes, a small square section of floor looked different, newer wood set into the older foundation. He crouched. The boards were clean, almost recently polished, and in the faint dust pattern he could see something circular pressed into the center. A keyhole. Ethan's stomach tightened. "Beneath the floor," he whispered. It was literal. He took a deep breath and slid the key into the slot. It fit perfectly, but when he turned it, the sound wasn't of a lock opening. It was deeper, heavier, like something shifting far beneath the house. A dull click. Then a vibration. The basement lights flickered, though he hadn't turned them on. The air grew colder, his breath misting. The walls seemed to hum, faintly at first, then louder. The vibrations grew stronger until a low mechanical rumble filled the space. Ethan stumbled back as the center of the floor began to sink. Dust rose and boards split apart, revealing a dark cavity below. From it came a faint, rhythmic ticking, like a heartbeat, or a clock long buried. He crouched near the opening, shining the flashlight inside. It wasn't dirt or stone beneath the floor. It was metal, old and corroded, with markings etched across it. They weren't letters, but symbols, spirals, eyes, and strange interlocking lines. The ticking grew louder. And then, from the darkness below, came a faint whisper, soft, almost human. "You sealed it yourself." Ethan froze. His mouth went dry. "Who's there?" he called out. No answer, only the faint sound of something moving below the metal surface, like fingers brushing against the underside. He stepped back, heart pounding, but as he did, his flashlight flickered and went out completely. The darkness was total. And in that silence, he could hear his own heartbeat. No, two heartbeats. One inside his chest, one beneath the floor. He dropped to his knees, clawing at the edges of the opening, prying at the boards with his hands. "What did I lock down here?" he gasped. As if in response, the voice came again, clearer this time, rising from beneath the metal. "You didn't lock it away, Ethan." The pause. "You locked yourself in." The floor suddenly lurched beneath him, and a blast of cold air rushed up, knocking him backward. The boards snapped shut with a thunderous crack. The key flew from his hand, clattering across the concrete before coming to rest at the base of the stairs. Ethan scrambled to his feet, shaking. The room was silent again, as if nothing had moved at all. The air settled. The lights flickered once more, then died completely. He stood in darkness, chest heaving, staring at the closed section of floor. He knew one thing now: whatever was beneath him wasn't trapped anymore. And when he turned to retrieve the key, it was gone. In its place, carved into the concrete, were 4 words: fresh, wet, and glistening like ink. The door is inside. Ethan's breath caught. Slowly, he looked up, toward the ceiling, where faint, shadowed seams formed the outline of a trapdoor above his head. Ethan stared up at the faint outline above him, a square hatch set perfectly into the ceiling. The door is inside. The message carved into the floor still burned in his mind. He didn't understand what it meant. Inside what? Inside him? Or inside this house? The air in the basement grew colder, thicker, pressing against his chest as he dragged an old ladder from the corner. Its metal legs squealed against the concrete as he positioned it beneath the hatch. The silence around him was unnatural. No creaks, no wind, no hum from the outside world. He climbed slowly, flashlight clenched between his teeth, his hand trembling as it reached for the small ring embedded in the hatch. It was cold, colder than metal should ever be. For a second he hesitated. Then he pulled. The hatch groaned open with a sound that felt alive, like would remembering pain. A rush of frigid air spilled out, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and something else. Something that smelled like him. He aimed the flashlight upward. The beam landed on a room, small, square, dustless. It shouldn't have been there. He'd lived in this house for years. There was no upper level. No attic. No extra space between floors. Ethan climbed up, every step echoing too loudly. The moment his head crossed the threshold, the air changed, thick, heavy, muffled. Like sound itself was being swallowed. He pulled himself inside. The room was bare. For walls, a single hanging bulb that flickered to life the moment he stood fully within. The floor was smooth, concrete, not wood. And in the middle of the room was a chair. He froze. It was the same chair from his childhood home, the one his father used to sit in when Ethan was a boy. The same scratches on the armrest, the same faint initials carved near the base. He stepped closer, his breath uneven. On the chair sat a small cassette recorder. His pulse thundered in his ears. It was identical to the one he'd found weeks ago, the one that had started all this. Only now, the tape inside was labeled in black ink. Play when you remember. Ethan's throat tightened. His hand shook as he pressed the button. A click. The pause. Then, his own voice. If you're hearing this, then you finally found it. The truth. You locked it away for a reason. He stumbled back. The voice was older, wearier, his voice, but not from any time he could remember. You thought burying it here would keep you safe. But memories don't die. They wait. They build walls. They become rooms. He looked around, at the perfectly sealed walls, the absence of windows, the single exit above. His heart dropped. This is the place you built to forget. But forgetting isn't the same as escaping. The tape clicked off. Silence. Then, faintly from behind the walls, came footsteps. Slow, heavy. Getting closer. Ethan spun toward the hatch, but it was gone. The ceiling was smooth, seamless. No exit. He pounded against the walls. Let me out. No response. Only the echo of his own voice bouncing back, distorted, overlapping, whispering words he hadn't said. Each whisper layered over the other until one clear sentence formed, circling him like breath on his skin. You were never meant to leave. The light flickered, dimmed, and went out completely. When it returned, the chair was empty. And Ethan was gone. Only the recorder remained, still spinning, whispering faintly into the empty room. He found the key, but never the lock.